The sound came just before dawn. A firm knock echoed against my driver's side window, cutting through the silence of another sleepless night. I looked at the glowing dashboard clock. 3:51 a.m. Funny how I remembered the exact minute. Maybe because I had spent the previous 6 hours staring at that clock, wondering how many more freezing nights my old 2008 Toyota Camry could protect me before winter finally won. December in Montana wasn't the kind of cold you ignored. It settled into your bones and stayed there. Even wearing 2 jackets, 3 sweaters, gloves with holes in the fingertips, and every blanket I owned, I could still see my breath filling the inside of the car like smoke. Another knock. This time a bright flashlight pierced through the fogged-up windshield. "Sir, could you step out of the vehicle?" My fingers barely worked as I reached for the handle. The cold had turned them stiff, but embarrassment made them shake even more. When I finally opened the door, I found myself facing a young police officer. He couldn't have been older than 30. His expression wasn't angry, it was cautious. The kind of look officers give when they aren't sure whether they're dealing with someone dangerous or simply someone life has broken. "License and registration." I nodded without arguing. There wasn't much left in my life to protect anyway. "My name is Raymond Caldwell. I'm 45 years old. 6 months earlier, I had been a senior logistics manager earning nearly 6 figures a year. I owned a comfortable home, drove to work every morning, and had spent almost 2 decades building a retirement account that made me believe my future was secure. Now my entire world fit inside the backseat of an aging sedan. $43 sat in my wallet. No apartment. No job. No family waiting for me. Just an empty Walmart parking lot that had become my temporary address. The officer studied my driver's license before walking back to his patrol car. I stood outside, hugging myself against the freezing wind. Humiliation burns differently than cold. Cold hurts your body. Humiliation reaches somewhere much deeper. I watched the officer type into the computer inside his cruiser. 1 minute passed. Then another. Then 5. My stomach tightened. Running a license shouldn't take this long. Unless something was wrong. My thoughts immediately raced through every possibility. Did someone steal my identity? Was there a mistake? Had my ex-wife somehow created another disaster for me? I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I'd never committed a crime. Not even close. I had never been arrested. Never been inside a courtroom, except during my divorce. Yet the officer remained glued to his screen. Finally, he picked up his radio. He spoke quietly, too softly for me to hear. A few moments later, he stepped back out of the patrol car. Something about him had changed. The suspicion was gone. Now he looked confused. Almost nervous. "Mr. Caldwell," he said carefully, "I'd appreciate it if you stayed exactly where you are." My heartbeat sped up. Am I in some kind of trouble? "No, sir." "Then what's happening?" He hesitated before answering. "I'm waiting for my captain." I frowned. "Your captain, why?" He looked as though he wanted to answer but couldn't. "I'm sorry, that's all I can say right now." 15 long minutes later, another patrol vehicle rolled into the parking lot. An older officer stepped out, his gray hair visible beneath his cap. The younger officer immediately walked over and showed him something on the computer. Both men looked at the screen. Then both looked at me. Whatever they had found, it wasn't something either of them had expected. And somehow, I had the feeling my life was about to change forever. The older officer approached slowly, studying me as though he were trying to solve a puzzle that had suddenly landed in his lap. He extended his hand. I'm Captain Frank Morno with the Billings Police Department. I shook it, still confused. Is something wrong? He glanced toward the younger officer before answering. Mr. Caldwell, you're not under arrest and you're not in any legal trouble. But when Officer Daniels ran your driver's license, something unusual appeared in a federal database. My eyebrows pulled together. A federal database. He nodded. A security notification. I laughed nervously. There has to be some mistake. I've never even had a speeding ticket. I believe you. His calm response surprised me. But I'd like to ask you a question. Go ahead. He paused for several seconds, choosing his words carefully. What was your mother's maiden name? The question hit me harder than I expected. My mother, Elizabeth. She had been gone for over 20 years. Cancer had taken her long before she'd had the chance to watch me build a career, buy a house, or eventually lose everything. For a moment, I wasn't standing in a frozen parking lot anymore. I was back inside that hospital room, holding her fragile hand while machines beeped around us. I remembered promising her I'd be okay. Neither of us knew how badly life would test that promise. Harmon, I answered quietly. Her maiden name was Elizabeth Harmon. Captain Morno's expression changed instantly. He looked at Officer Daniels. The younger officer gave a subtle nod. Without saying another word, the captain stepped away and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number from memory. The call connected almost immediately. This is Captain Morno with Billings PD, he said. I've confirmed the identity. He paused, listening. Yes. Another pause. Mother's maiden name matches. His face became unusually serious. I understand. He listened for nearly a full minute before ending the call. When he returned, something about his posture had changed. He no longer looked at me as a homeless man sleeping in a parking lot. He looked at me with an odd mixture of respect and disbelief. Mr. Caldwell, he said softly, would you be willing to come with us? I blinked. Where? Someplace warm. I don't have money. He gave the smallest smile. Breakfast is on us. I stared at him. This is starting to feel like a dream. I imagine it does. Within minutes, I climbed into the back seat of the patrol vehicle. My old Camry stayed behind, sitting beneath the flickering parking lot lights with everything I still owned packed inside. As we drove through nearly empty streets, nobody spoke. Snow drifted across the road, while the heater slowly thawed my frozen hands. I couldn't stop thinking. Federal database. Mother's maiden name. A phone call. Free breakfast. None of it made any sense. 10 minutes later, we pulled into a small 24-hour diner. The place looked untouched by time. Neon lights buzzed outside the windows. Inside, only a few truck drivers sat quietly drinking coffee. A waitress welcomed us with a tired smile before leading us to a booth. Captain Morno ordered eggs, bacon, hash browns, toast, and coffee for both of us without even asking what I wanted. Normally, I would have protested. Instead, I was too hungry. When the food arrived, I forgot every bit of pride I still had. For the first time in 3 days, I ate a hot meal. Captain Morno didn't interrupt. He simply watched while I cleared the entire plate. Only after I finished did he quietly speak. In 32 years wearing this badge, he said, I've seen some strange things. He folded his hands on the table. But I've never seen a routine license check trigger a response from the United States Marshals. I slowly lowered my coffee cup. The U.S. Marshals. He nodded. They're flying here. I felt my stomach tighten. For me, Captain Morno looked me straight in the eyes. Yes. He checked his watch before adding one sentence that made every hair on my arm stand up. They should be here within the hour, and whatever they're coming to tell you has been waiting decades to reach you. I stared at Captain Morno, convinced I'd misheard him. The U.S. Marshals are coming here for me. He nodded once. I wish I could explain more, Mr. Caldwell, but whatever this is, it's well above my pay grade. I leaned back in the booth, trying to process everything. Just hours earlier, my biggest concern had been finding another safe place to park before sunrise. Now federal officers were flying across the country because of my driver's license. Nothing about this felt real. Captain Morno broke the silence. Is there anything unusual about your past? Anything at all? I shook my head. I grew up in Seattle. My dad was an electrician. Mom stayed home until she got sick. We weren't rich. We weren't connected. We were normal. He listened carefully. Any military service? I tried to enlist after high school. And they rejected me because of a minor heart condition. Doctors later said it wasn't serious, but by then I'd already started working. He nodded again. No criminal history. I almost laughed. I've spent my whole life following rules. Outside, dawn slowly pushed away the darkness. The diner windows began filling with pale gray light. Truck drivers came and went, while waitresses refilled coffee cups like it was any ordinary morning. Only our booth felt frozen in time. Then, exactly 45 minutes later, a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. Captain Morno looked through the window. They're here. 2 men stepped out. Neither wore a uniform. Dark suits. Polished shoes. Calm expressions. One appeared to be around 60, with neatly trimmed gray hair, and the posture of someone who had spent decades in government service. The other looked younger, maybe in his mid-30s, carrying a leather briefcase. As they entered the diner, every conversation around us seemed to fade. The older man walked directly toward our booth. Mr. Raymond Arthur Caldwell. I slowly stood. Yes. He reached into his jacket and displayed a gold badge. Deputy U.S. Marshal William Thornton. The younger man introduced himself as Deputy Marshal James Chen. Both sat down. Thornton folded his hands on the table. What we're about to discuss is highly confidential. I swallowed hard. Am I in danger? No. Then why am I here? He looked directly into my eyes. Because your identity has finally been verified. My confusion only grew. I don't understand. I know. He opened a thick folder and carefully removed several documents. Let's start with your mother. The words instantly caught my attention. Your mother's full name before marriage was Elizabeth Harmon. I nodded. Correct. Thornton continued. Elizabeth Harmon had an older brother. I frowned. My mother never mentioned having a brother. She wasn't allowed to. Those 5 words hit me like ice water. What do you mean, wasn't allowed? He slid an old black and white photograph across the table. A man in his 40s stood beside a large industrial building, smiling confidently at the camera. The name beneath the photo read, Alexander Harmon. Thornton spoke quietly. Alexander Harmon founded one of the largest private technology companies in America during the late 1980s. I stared at the photograph. The man's eyes. They looked strangely familiar. He wasn't just successful, Thornton continued. He built a business that worked on highly sensitive government contracts. Within a few years, his company was worth billions. I looked back at him. Why are you telling me this? He took a slow breath. Because Alexander Harmon wasn't just a businessman. He paused long enough for my heart to start racing. He was your uncle. The entire diner disappeared around me. I couldn't hear the coffee machines. Couldn't hear the conversations. Couldn't even hear my own breathing. My uncle. Yes. I shook my head immediately. No. There has to be a mistake. There isn't. My mother never had a brother. Thornton's expression softened. She did. He gently pushed another document toward me. It was a certified birth record. My mother's name. Her parents' names. And listed directly beneath her. Alexander James Harmon. Brother. I stared at the paper, unable to blink. Everything I believed about my family, everything I thought I knew, had just begun to fall apart. And somehow, I had the terrifying feeling that this unbelievable revelation was only the beginning. For nearly a full minute, I couldn't speak. I looked from the birth record to the old photograph and back again, hoping I'd find some clue that this was all a misunderstanding. Instead, every document only confirmed what Deputy Marshal Thornton had just told me. My mother never mentioned any of this. Thornton nodded sympathetically. That was intentional. Why? He leaned forward slightly. Because keeping you alive mattered more than telling you the truth. Those words settled over the table like a heavy blanket. I stared at him. I don't understand. Thornton folded his hands together before continuing. In the early 1990s, your uncle's company became one of the government's most valuable defense contractors. The technology they developed attracted attention from organizations that wanted access to classified research. Deputy Chen opened the leather briefcase and placed several declassified government files on the table. The threats weren't rumors, Chen explained. Federal investigators believed members of your uncle's extended family could become targets. I slowly shook my head. So, my mother hid our family because someone wanted to hurt us. Exactly. The government recommended complete secrecy. Thornton continued. Every public connection between Alexander Harmon and his relatives was sealed. Your parents received new instructions, new documentation, and strict orders never to discuss your family history, not even with you. I felt my chest tighten. So my entire childhood was built around protecting you. I looked down at my coffee, now completely cold. Suddenly memories I'd never questioned started making sense. Why Mom always became nervous whenever strangers asked personal questions. Why she avoided family reunions. Why there were almost no photographs of her childhood. Why she cried every year on the same day without explaining why. I had always assumed grief came from losing her parents. Maybe she'd been mourning her brother. Thornton carefully removed another folder. This is where things become even more unbelievable. I almost laughed. I think we've already passed unbelievable. For the first time all morning, Thornton smiled. Fair enough. He opened the folder. When Alexander Harmon died in 1994, most people believed his estate had been dissolved through various corporate transactions. I remember hearing something about a plane crash. Officially, yes. But privately, he had already prepared an extraordinary estate plan. Deputy Chen slid a thick legal document toward me. Your uncle never married. He had no children. No direct heirs. I quietly asked, then who inherited everything? Thornton looked directly at me. You did. The words echoed in my head. No. Not immediately, he clarified. Alexander understood the threats hadn't disappeared. So instead of transferring his wealth, he instructed a board of trustees to protect every asset until the remaining danger had passed, or until you reached a specific age. What age? 45. I froze. I turned 45. 4 months ago. My heart began pounding. The trustees began searching for you immediately. Chen continued. The problem was that your financial records suddenly disappeared from normal patterns. I frowned. What does that mean? You sold your house during the divorce. You lost your job. You closed investment accounts. You moved several times. Eventually you became difficult to locate. I let out a slow breath. So while I was sleeping in my car, they were trying to find you. I couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. 6 months earlier, I'd been fighting to save my marriage. Then I'd fought to save my career. Then I'd fought simply to survive. All that time, someone had been searching for me. Thornton reached into the folder one final time. He carefully placed a single sheet of paper in front of me. There is one figure you need to see. I looked down. At first, my exhausted brain couldn't process the number. It had too many commas. Too many digits. I blinked. Read it again. Then a third time. Finally, I whispered the amount out loud. $4.8 billion. Neither marshal spoke. They simply watched as the reality slowly reached me. Yesterday, I had counted quarters to buy gas. This morning, I owned $43. Now 2 federal officers were calmly informing me that I had inherited one of the largest private fortunes in America. Before I could gather my thoughts, Deputy Chen quietly reached into his briefcase again. This, he said, placing a sealed envelope on the table, may be worth more to you than every dollar you just inherited. I looked at the faded handwriting across the front. It read only 7 words. For my son, when the time is right. For several seconds, I simply stared at the envelope. The handwriting was unmistakable. Every birthday card. Every lunch note she slipped into my backpack. Every Christmas tag under the tree. It was hers. My mother's. The woman I'd buried more than 2 decades ago had somehow found a way to speak to me again. My hands trembled as I carefully broke the seal. The paper inside had yellowed with age, but the ink remained perfectly clear. I took a deep breath and began reading. My dearest Raymond, if this letter has finally reached you, then it means 2 things. First, you've lived long enough to learn the truth. Second, the people I feared most are no longer a threat to you. I'm sorry, more than you'll ever know. For years I wanted to tell you everything, about our family, about your uncle, and about the life that should have been yours. But every time I gathered the courage, I remembered why we stayed silent. Keeping you safe was the only thing that mattered to me. If you ever feel angry with me after learning the truth, I understand. I accepted long ago that you might never forgive me, but I hope one day you'll realize that every secret I kept came from love, never from shame. Your uncle Alexander adored you. He visited only a handful of times while you were very young. You probably don't remember him, but he never stopped asking about you. Every birthday he wanted to send gifts. Every holiday he wanted to visit. He sacrificed those moments because he believed distance would keep you alive. He often told me something I'll never forget. He said, "Money is easy to build. Family is impossible to replace." If you're reading this, then everything he worked for now belongs to you. Please remember that wealth is only useful if it makes someone else's life better. Don't measure your success by what you own. Measure it by the people whose lives improve because you existed. Most importantly, don't let bitterness become your future. Pain changes people, Raymond. Don't let it change you into someone you wouldn't recognize. I've always been proud of the man I believed you'd become. I love you always. Mom. The words blurred. I hadn't realized tears were falling until one landed on the paper. For years, I'd believed my mother died carrying ordinary regrets. Instead, she had carried the weight of an impossible secret. Everything she'd hidden had been to protect me. I carefully folded the letter and slipped it back inside the envelope. No amount of money could ever equal what those few pages meant to me. Deputy Thornton gave me a respectful moment before speaking. Your mother requested that letter remain sealed until your identity was officially verified. I nodded silently. I'm glad she did. Deputy Chen closed the folder in front of him. The next step is traveling to Seattle. Seattle. The trust is administered there. He slid another folder toward me. Our legal team has already arranged temporary accommodations, clothing, transportation, and security. I looked down at my worn-out jacket. My clothes. We'll replace them. My car. Thornton smiled. You can keep it if you'd like. Despite everything, I laughed. I think I will. The old Camry had been more than transportation. It had been my shelter. My bedroom. The only thing I had left when my world collapsed. Throwing it away would feel like pretending those months never happened. And I never wanted to forget them. As we stood to leave the diner, I glanced through the window. Across the parking lot sat the faded Toyota, covered in a thin layer of snow. Just hours earlier, I'd believed it represented the end of my life. Now, it marked the beginning of an entirely new one. What I didn't know was that the hardest part wasn't inheriting billions of dollars. It was deciding what kind of man I wanted to become after finally getting everything that had always been mine. And somewhere hundreds of miles away, Sandra and Mitchell were waking up, completely unaware that the man they believed they'd destroyed was about to return, not seeking revenge out of anger, but determined to make sure justice finally caught up with them. 6 weeks passed in what felt like a single breath. Every day brought another meeting, another stack of legal documents, another DNA test, another signature confirming what still felt impossible. The trustees left nothing to chance. Family records were compared. Government files were unsealed. Old photographs were authenticated. Even childhood medical records were reviewed. Only after every question had been answered did the lead trustee finally smile. It's official, Mr. Caldwell. She slid the final folder across the polished conference table. You are the sole legal heir to Alexander Harmon's estate. I looked around the boardroom overlooking downtown Seattle. 6 weeks earlier, I'd been sleeping in a freezing Walmart parking lot. Now I was sitting on the top floor of a glass skyscraper, surrounded by attorneys who managed billions of dollars. Life really could change overnight. Margaret Ellis, the senior trustee, folded her hands. Before we discuss your assets, I'd like to ask you something. Of course. What do you intend to do with all of this? She wasn't asking about investments. She was asking about character. I thought carefully before answering. I don't want to spend the rest of my life buying bigger houses and faster cars. She nodded, waiting. I know what it feels like to lose everything. I know what hopelessness looks like. If this fortune can keep someone else from experiencing that, then that's where I want to start. For the first time since we'd met, Margaret's expression softened. Your uncle would have respected that answer. Over the following weeks, I immersed myself in learning the business my uncle had spent his life building. Financial reports, investment portfolios, corporate structures, real estate holdings, technology ventures. charitable foundations. Every morning started before sunrise. Every night ended long after dark. The money itself never impressed me. The opportunities it created did. One afternoon, while reviewing historical company records, I came across an old framed photograph. Alexander Harmon stood beside dozens of employees outside the company's first headquarters. Everyone was smiling. On the back of the frame, someone had written one sentence in faded ink. "Success means nothing if you forget the people who helped you earn it." I quietly placed the photograph on my desk. It stayed there every day afterward. But despite everything changing around me, one thing refused to leave my thoughts. Sandra and Mitchell Garrett. Their faces still appeared whenever I closed my eyes. The courthouse. The laughter. The final insult. "You'll probably die homeless." Those words had echoed inside my head every night I slept in my car. Now they echoed for a different reason. Not because they hurt. Because they reminded me never to become like them. Still, something didn't sit right. Mitchell hadn't simply won a divorce case. He had manipulated every part of it. The venue. The paperwork. The negotiations. Everything had felt engineered. One evening, I mentioned those concerns during a meeting with Margaret. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked only one question. "Do you believe what happened to you was merely unethical or criminal?" I thought back carefully, then answered, "I think he knew exactly what he was doing." Margaret nodded. "If that's true, the truth deserves to be uncovered." The next morning she introduced me to a private investigative firm staffed by former FBI agents, forensic accountants, and retired federal prosecutors. Their reputation was legendary. Their lead investigator, Daniel Cross, reviewed my divorce documents for less than 30 minutes before looking up. "I've seen cases like this before." "You have?" He nodded. "Not often, but enough to recognize the pattern." He closed the file. "If your ex-wife's attorney manipulated one case." He paused before finishing the sentence. "There's a good chance yours wasn't the first." That single possibility changed everything. For the first time since inheriting the fortune, my focus shifted away from the past and toward uncovering a truth that might expose a much larger deception than I'd ever imagined. Daniel Cross kept his promise. 3 months after his team began investigating Mitchell Garrett and Associates, he walked into my office carrying a thick black binder. He placed it on the conference table without saying a word. "I hope you're sitting down," he finally said. I frowned. "That bad?" "Worse." He opened the binder. Inside were financial records, sworn statements, bank transfers, emails, and dozens of photographs. "We found evidence suggesting Mr. Garrett has spent years manipulating personal injury cases." I slowly turned the pages. Some files showed inflated medical claims. Others documented payments routed through shell companies. There were emails discussing witnesses before testimony and suspicious financial transfers that made no legitimate business sense. "What about proof?" I asked. Cross nodded. "We have former employees willing to testify." He slid another folder toward me. A former paralegal copied thousands of internal emails before resigning. Another folder. A medical consultant admitted he falsified injury reports in exchange for kickbacks. Another. A financial analyst traced millions of dollars through hidden accounts. I leaned back in my chair. "This is enough to destroy him." Cross looked at me carefully. "It's enough to send him to prison." Silence filled the room. For months, I had imagined this moment. I thought I'd feel excited. Instead, I felt calm, almost disappointed, because revenge had slowly lost its appeal. Justice hadn't. There was something else, Cross continued. Your ex-wife, Sandra. I hadn't heard her name spoken aloud in months. She wasn't running the operation, he explained. But she knew more than she admitted. He handed me several emails. Sandra had approved paperwork, scheduled meetings, forwarded confidential documents. Nothing suggested she created the fraud. But she had willingly participated. I quietly closed the folder. So she made her choice. Cross nodded. What would you like us to do? I looked out the window toward Seattle's skyline. Not yet. He seemed surprised. We have enough evidence. I know. So why wait? I turned back toward him. Because Mitchell still believes he won. Cross remained silent. He thinks I'm broken. He thinks I disappeared. He thinks I'll spend the rest of my life hiding from what he did. A small smile crossed my face. I'd like him to see the truth before everything collapses. Cross folded his arms. What do you have in mind? I walked over to the whiteboard hanging beside my desk. At the top I wrote 3 words. The Harmon Foundation. Our annual charity gala is next month. Cross immediately understood. You want him there. I do. He'll never accept an invitation from you. No. I smiled again. But he'll absolutely accept one from the Harmon Foundation. Within days, beautifully embossed invitations were delivered to influential attorneys, business leaders, judges, philanthropists, and investors across the Pacific Northwest. One envelope was personally delivered to Garrett and Associates. Its message was simple. The Harmon Foundation cordially invites Mitchell Garrett to attend our annual Leadership and Justice Gala as a prospective strategic partner. Cross laughed when he read it. Justice Gala. The irony seemed appropriate. Mitchell accepted less than 24 hours later. Exactly as I'd expected. Men like him never ignored opportunities to stand beside wealth and influence, especially when they believed those people could benefit their careers. The evening of the gala finally arrived. The grand ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers. More than 300 guests filled the room. Business executives, community leaders, federal officials, philanthropists, reporters, everyone dressed in black tie. Everyone curious about the mysterious new chairman of the Harmon Foundation, who had quietly transformed the organization over the previous months. I stood in a tailored navy suit near the ballroom entrance. Not because I wanted attention. Because I wanted the first face Mitchell Garrett would see. To be mine. At precisely 7:12 p.m., the ballroom doors opened. Mitchell entered with the same confidence I remembered from the courthouse. Sandra walked beside him, wearing an elegant emerald gown. They smiled. They laughed. They greeted guests as though they belonged among them. Neither of them noticed me. Not yet. I watched them move through the crowd for several minutes. Then Mitchell turned. Our eyes met. His smile disappeared instantly. The color drained from his face. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. The man who once predicted I would die homeless now stood frozen in the middle of my ballroom. And he had absolutely no idea that the biggest surprise of his life was only moments away. Mitchell Garrett stood frozen. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked completely unsure of himself. His confident smile had vanished. Sandra noticed the change in his expression and turned toward me. The moment she recognized my face, she grabbed his arm. "Raymond." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. I smiled politely. "It's been a while." Neither of them moved. Neither of them seemed able to understand what they were seeing. 6 months ago, I had stood outside a courthouse wearing a wrinkled suit, watching them celebrate while my life fell apart. Tonight, I stood in a custom-tailored tuxedo, surrounded by business leaders, government officials, and guests who had come because they respected the organization I now led. Mitchell finally cleared his throat. This doesn't make any sense. Doesn't it? You were. He stopped himself. I finished the sentence for him. Homeless. He looked away. I remember exactly what you told me outside the courthouse. I took one slow step closer. You'll probably die homeless. I spent weeks wondering if you were right. Sandra lowered her eyes. Neither of them answered. I gestured toward the ballroom. Welcome to the Harmon Foundation Gala. Mitchell looked around in confusion. What does that have to do with you? I smiled. Everything. He frowned. I'm the chairman of the Harmon Foundation. His face lost what little color remained. No. Yes. The invitation you accepted. I paused deliberately. Came from my office. Sandra looked back and forth between us. Raymond, how? I discovered something about my family. Something neither of us ever knew. Mitchell swallowed hard. You inherited it. I inherited responsibility. The wealth simply came with it. Before either of them could respond, Daniel Cross quietly approached. He leaned close enough that only I could hear. They're here. I nodded once. Good. Mitchell noticed the exchange. What does that mean? I glanced toward the ballroom entrance. You're about to find out. Almost on cue, the large doors opened. Several federal agents entered alongside investigators from financial crime units. Conversations around the ballroom slowly faded. Guests turned toward the entrance. Some reporters instinctively lifted their cameras. The lead investigator walked directly toward Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell Garrett. Mitchell forced a smile. Can I help you? The investigator displayed his credentials. Federal Financial Crimes Task Force. His voice remained calm and professional. We have warrants authorizing the seizure of financial records connected to Garrett and Associates. Mitchell's confidence disappeared. There must be some mistake. We've been conducting a lengthy investigation. Sandra stepped backward. What investigation? The investigator continued. The evidence includes financial fraud, witness manipulation, falsified legal documentation, and multiple conspiracy-related offenses. The ballroom fell silent. Every guest watched. Every camera focused on Mitchell. He looked toward me. You did this. I calmly shook my head. No. I uncovered it. What happened after that? I looked directly into his eyes. Was the consequence of your own decisions. Sandra's face turned pale. Tears filled her eyes. Raymond. She struggled to speak. I'm sorry. For a brief moment, I remembered the woman I had once loved. Then another memory replaced it. Her laughter outside the courthouse. The day I lost everything. I answered quietly. I'm not here because I wanted revenge. I'm here because truth eventually catches everyone. Neither she nor Mitchell had another word to say. As investigators escorted them away for questioning, the ballroom remained silent until the doors finally closed behind them. Daniel stepped beside me. You could have humiliated them. I had the opportunity. I looked across the room where guests slowly resumed their conversations. I didn't need humiliation. They created that themselves. A few moments later, I walked onto the stage. The audience applauded politely, unaware of everything that had brought me there. I adjusted the microphone and looked across the crowd. Tonight isn't about wealth. It's about second chances. I know what it's like to lose your home. I know what it's like to believe life is over. And I know that sometimes the greatest victories don't come from getting even. They come from rebuilding yourself so completely that the people who tried to destroy you become nothing more than a chapter in your story. The room stood and applauded. As I looked out across the audience, I thought back to that freezing night in the Walmart parking lot. The old Camry. $43. A knock on the window. At the time, I thought my life had reached its end. I was wrong. It had only been the beginning.